See if this is working. Yes, it is. Hello, everybody. Good evening. Thank you all for coming. So this evening we're all together to talk about ethical finance, and with huge thanks to Rob Harrison here, who has joined us to give us his immense knowledge about that. Rob was a founder editor of the Ethical Consumer magazine. He's written on the subject plentifully, including his own book, which is called The Handbook of Ethical Purchasing. And he's also used by, or brought in by NGOs and government departments around the world to advise on their CSR policies and to implement them. So he's the guy, and we will be having a talk from him all the way from Manchester, followed by a talk from Jeremy here, who is one of our members, but also very knowledgeable on a trailblazing energy company called Ripple Energy, who deal in new renewables. And then after that, we'll open the floor to a Q&A. And Jeremy will be outside afterwards if you want to have a face-to-face conversation with him. But to kick off, we'll hand you over to Rob. Hi, Rob. Good evening. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, everybody. I don't know if you can hear me and see me. Yes. Yeah, good. Everyone seems happy. Good to see you all. I've just got a little bit of feedback from my system. I'm just wondering if you could maybe mute some kind of microphone in the room. It's always inevitably get a few technical issues when we try and make this sort of thing work.
I think all the other mics should be muted, but I'll take down the environment mics.
Okay.
Maybe part of it.
Yeah. Okay. No worries. It's always slightly disconcerting when you hear your own voice slightly delayed back again, coming at you. So now that seems to have stopped now, so we can make a start. Thanks everyone for coming. I'm just going to ask people to put hands up. Start with. I can sort of see most of you, but not everyone. I just kind of to get a sense of who we are in the room, and I just want to ask whether anyone has heard of Ethical Consumer before. Anyone that would? That's pretty much everybody. Okay, so we don't have to explain too much about that. Just the next one. Does anyone consider themselves to have their savings in an ethical bank account? Does anyone think they've maybe got that? Probably slightly fewer have heard of Ethical Consumer, so maybe half the room. And has anyone got investments in the stock market in the room? A couple. Yeah, maybe about half again. Okay. That's interesting. It's useful for me just to know who I'm speaking to, in order to try and not say things that are unnecessary, if you see what I mean. So I haven't prepared slides this evening, and what I'm going to do is just take you through some of the things that we have on the Ethical Consumer website, which is a sort of interactive thing that allows you to ask questions. But I'm mainly going to be talking about ethical bank and building society accounts and why they're important. Then we're going to talk a little bit about ethical funds that people tend to invest in. And then finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we call ethical consumer direct ethical investments. So there are those three subjects. And just before we start, I always just reflect on this. I looked the stats up this morning, and when you look at who has savings in the United Kingdom, almost half of people in the United Kingdom, 46%, have £1,000 or less in savings. So actually, a lot of the money in bank accounts and in investment accounts are held by actually a small minority of people. Indeed, only about 30% of people have stock market investments in the UK. So although we think we've all got savings, it isn't quite as even as we might think. And this is why we spend quite a bit of time looking at banks at Ethical Consumer. I think the other reason why we look at banks at Ethical Consumer is that we've got a sense that there are systemic problems with the economic system around us, and we can all see them, and particularly climate change is kind of what is the biggest. And I think this is the theme of the it's London Climate Action Week, isn't it? That this talk is part of. So we can see there are systemic problems with the economic system. And if we think about banks and insurance companies and finance companies and investment companies, in a sense, they sit right at the heart of the system that's going wrong, if you see what I mean. And the reason they're so important is that they make decisions on what happens throughout the system. They make decisions on whether people are going to invest in palm oil plantations or whether people are going to invest in coal and gas, and a wide variety of things. So for people who are looking at system change, people are coming to the financial sector really and going, if we've not fixed this, then we've got problems. So ethical consumer spends a lot of time looking at the financial sector. And when we look at a list of the top 5 things to do if you want to live an ethical life, making sure that your money is in an ethical place is up there in the top 5 things. I'm first of all, I'm going to talk about the ethical money. I'm going to share my screen now, which just shows a little bit. So let's see if that's going to work. I'm going to go share now. And in theory, yeah, so this is our this is the Ethical Consumer website. We have a section on ethical money. And if we just scroll down this page here, we can see some of the, if you like, discursive articles that we're writing about, where, what makes banks unethical? Well, we're looking at banks and the climate crisis. We're looking at banks and the arms trade. We're looking at banking sector pay gap for women, high pay in the financial sector. We're looking at their historical links to the slave trade, human rights abuses that are being funded by bank decisions, animal exploitation, and a range of other things. So we know that there's an issue here with and all elements of civil society are beginning to look at banks and go, hang on, all the things that we're working on, you guys are sitting there funding the stuff that we don't like. And very particularly on the climate issue, there's a big consortium here called Banking on Climate Chaos, who put together a research report every year, and there are 600 organizations involved in it globally. It's a huge project. And just to look, this is the dirty dozen worst banks since the Paris Agreement, and we can see here that the top 3 are American banks here. This is the amount of money that they've invested in fossil fuels since 2016, since the Paris Agreement, and it's 430 billion from JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup. So we can see that the US banks are topping that list there. But we don't need to go very far down to see that UK banks, particularly Barclays and HSBC down the bottom, are there in the top 12. So UK banks are playing a critical role in funding new oil and gas projects at the time of year. Right now. And so it's kind of rather refreshes itself in a lively way, that site, doesn't it? Which is slightly disconcerting. So I'm gonna move on now to the Ethical Consumer website, which possibly you know about. It tells us we have buyer's guides, and with our savings accounts, we look at all the providers of savings accounts in the UK, or pretty much all of them, and we rate them against all the things that we've been looking at, the kind of things like involvement in human rights abuses or in climate problems. And we sit there and we give them a score out of what is now 100. And we have tables here, and we can see that, if you want to put some savings in a savings account, the ones that are scoring highest on our system here are Charity Bank and Ecology Building Society and Triodos, probably all names that you guys have heard of, since we had quite a few hands up in there. But we can also see, so the numbers go all the way down, all these different accounts to Lloyds Bank scoring a very quite a respectable 25 out of 100 in banks. But right down the bottom, we can see Barclays and HSBC here. And just to show you that some of the data that sits behind our analysis that scores them out of that gives them 3 out of 100 is that we can click on HSBC Bank here, and we can see who owns it and all this kind of stuff. But we can look at these are some of the environment discussions that we're talking about around, you know, they've been criticized by BankTrack, which is a Netherlands-based organization, for some of their involvement in what they call dodgy deals. We can see their funding. They're involved in deforestation for palm oil, and they're also involved in as we were discussing in the climate crisis. And just to show how it works, there's now like a detailed essay that sits behind each of these and explains why we think they get our worst rating here. And you know, it's very notably here, I'm just pointing to HSBC here. At Ethical Consumer, our teams go through their reports and try to understand them. So HSBC at the time that we wrote this, which was June 23, is not, it's not attempting to add up or publish its own carbon impact properly. So it isn't even trying to measure what it's doing, or if it is trying to measure what it's doing, it's not telling us about it. And these are its financed emissions, if you see what I mean. It tells us it's measuring what it's doing in its offices, and it measures what it's doing flying around the world to meetings, but it's not trying to calculate its financed emissions and to bring them down in a way that we would hope. So all these issues, if you like, allow us to calculate a score for a wide range of banks and building societies, and this information is very popular with consumers. It's one of our most popular resources, the banking sector guides, partly because there are very few labels like fair trade and organic in this sector, so people are looking for independent advice. And so this is what we've done around banking. In the same way, we've looked at ethical investment, what we call ethical investment funds. And these are, if you like, pooled funds where you can put your stocks and shares, ISAs and this kind of stuff. So individuals investing in the stock market who aren't trading in shares directly themselves are likely to go into pooled funds. It used to be called unit trusts. And again, in the same way, we're scoring people out of 100 on the availability or on the quality of their ethical investment funds. And we can see here that there are a few at the top who we think are very good, and then a few at the bottom who we think are quite poor, such as Vanguard, for example, and Scottish Widows. And there's more detail behind each of, you know, again, we can click on these and look and see, you know, what you know, why a company is getting a particular mark. So we have our buyer's guides on the website that allow people to kind of drill down and find out more detail about their own banks. We also have lots of detail about how to switch and this kind of stuff. So but finally, I'm just going to talk a little bit about fossil-free investment funds. So at Ethical Consumer, we've taken a view that if you're going to make claims that your funds are sustainable or ethical, we think the least you could do is to be out of oil and gas. And when we looked at it in a research report that we did in 2022, we found that something, can't remember the statistic, but it's to 23, nearly a quarter of the funds advertising themselves as sustainable. invested in companies on the Carbon Underground 200, which is essentially big oil and gas infrastructure projects. So that just because a fund is calling itself sustainable doesn't necessarily mean that it is. And in the same way that we have analysed banks and ethical investment funds, we've also looked at funds that we call properly fossil free, and so we've got a list of fossil free funds on there who we tend to recommend to people who are concerned about climate change, if you see what I mean. And these are pooled funds that will have, you know, between 20 and perhaps 100 different stocks and shares in them that they will trade and move around. And those of you with investments may well recognize some of these. But there are now a range of properly fossil fuel divested funds that we can identify and share with readers. I think finally, the thing that I was going to just mention at the end is something that I have inconveniently not put up on my screen, so you're just going to have to watch me navigate for a moment to it. We have this thing that we call direct ethical investments, and I perhaps could have asked it. So where we go, blah, 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 direct ethical investment platforms. What we've talked about before is putting money into banks and into pooled funds that are traded on the stock market. But it is also possible for investors to invest directly in projects that they like. And there are now some quite successful projects that are operating very specifically direct ethical investments. And the ones that we're looking at here are FX. This is again something that people may well have heard of, and this is when we last did research on it. They were, you know, you could invest in property development for homeless people in Cornwall, electric car and bike hire firm in Exeter, or affordable housing in Birmingham. There you go. And Abundance Investment is another platform that works well for direct ethical investment. And then this should, you know, one of these was solar panels on council-owned rooftops in Berkshire, and anaerobic digestion plant for power generation at a Staffordshire farm. So in a sense, there's a world of what we call direct ethical investments that we, that in a sense, are more about looking for the change that you want to see and putting money directly in those. And often investing in these, you become, you know, you're on the mailing list of the organizations and they tell you how it's getting along. And it's a much more personal involvement in a type of investment that you get in this thing, in these arrangements. This is another one, you know, Energy for All operates a similar scheme around low carbon projects. And these are, when we looked at it, there were hydro sites in the Highlands of Scotland, and again solar panels on Edinburgh rooftops, were all things that individuals could invest in. And in a sense, we, you know, these are the ones where you can feel yourself making the most impact with the investment, because you can see it happen, if you see what I mean, and you can see the change happening. With the other types, when you're putting money into, when you're looking at your savings in banks or building societies, it's not, and in pooled funds, it's less easy to see the change that's happening through making ethical choices. But these direct ethical investments are great. I mean, I have to say that most advisors tell you not to put more than 10% of anything that you've got in these funds, because they can be quite risky. But we do like some of the direct ethical investment things, and we've got a list of the websites that do these here. There's a thing called Social Stock Exchange. There's a project called Lend with Care and Oiko Credit, which people probably know about in this group. Shared Interest is another one, looking at doing fair trade projects around the world. And there are also community shares in cooperatives. And I think this is something that we may get on to later on this afternoon. So I think that's the point where I was going to stop sharing the screen. So that's probably all that I wanted to say, just by a way of introduction into the work that we do at Ethical Consumer around trying to get good quality advice to people about greenwash around financial services and how to make important choices. And so I'm probably going to stop here. I mean, we could go to questions that relate directly to what I've said, because I quite like Q&As in a way. Or we could wait and do the next presentation and do Q&As at an end. It's up to you guys. What do you think?
Hi, Rob. I think we're going to do the Q&As at the end. So if you're happy, I'll introduce Jeremy, who's going to talk about ripple energy. Thank you very much for that. You've got one, have you?
So, is this mic working? Yes, good. Okay. I have another appreciation for Rob, which is more direct, which is that the only reason that I invested in Ripple Energy in the first place is because Ethical Consumer magazine did an analysis of utility providers, and Ripple Energy came out #1 on the table. So I thought, well, that sounds good, and that was what started me with the process of investing in Ripple Energy. So could I have the first slide from the PowerPoint? So what attracted me and most to Ripple is that it's a way of putting money directly into getting new renewable energy built quickly, and that really appealed to me because I think there's nothing more important than that. The other thing I liked is that I like cooperative projects. So instead of a large company supplying energy, the fact that it's a cooperative and I have shares in the cooperative really appealed to me. I didn't think about this so much at the time that I made the first investment, but I have thought about it since, which is that it also functions as protection or hedging against future price increases. And the way that really became clear was that in the second year that I was receiving monthly savings on our electricity bill, suddenly the savings tripled, the rate of savings tripled. And the reason for that was that the wind farm sold its electricity for a 12-month period in advance. And at the time that they sold it, the energy price had dramatically increased. So at exactly the same time as we needed to pay more for our electricity, we were receiving more. Now that price has gone down again, so we're not receiving as much in the third year as we were in the second year. But the point about it is that if energy prices go up, then your share of the wind farm gives you more money because your electricity is being sold at a higher price. The other thing for us is that we still want to move away from gas heating, but the problem with moving away from gas is that you can end up with a really expensive electricity bill. So what we're trying to do is a whole plan to move away from gas, but without it being expensive. And Ripple is a good way of achieving that. So could we go to the next slide? Oh yeah, now I need to mention conflict of interest. So first of all, I've got shares in the first 2 Ripple Energy projects. Whatever any of you do or anybody else does makes no difference to that. But Ripple Energy put out a call to raise capital for expansion, which is a completely separate issue from buying shares. And I decided to put some money into, they call it seed capital. And along with many other investors, I've put money in. So what that means is that in future, those will be turned into shares. Ripple does well. I own some shares. So I need to announce that as a potential conflict of interest. The other thing is they offer this £25 refer a friend thing, and we discussed it in the committee. And I tried to get them to do it for MHSG, but they couldn't do that. But what I've said is if any of you or anybody else through MHSG joins and wants to use the link, I'm going to donate the £25 to MHSG. I'd invite you to do the same, but you don't need to, and you don't need to use the link. So then the other thing is, what I'm really talking about is why I joined Ripple and what my experience of it has been. You know, it may be there are all sorts of other options that I don't know about. And so, you know, I'm not pressuring or making a specific recommendation. I'm not an expert in the field. I'm just telling you my experience. So could we go to the next one? Okay, so this is, I don't know if any of you read Bill McKibben. If you don't, I would recommend reading him. He produces a blog which is free. You can become a paid contributor as well. And it's written up there, Bill McKibben. The reason I've put this up is he's talking here about a race between a rapidly unraveling climate and a rapid build-out of renewable energy. The outcome of that race will determine just how many people die, how many cities drown, how many species survive. Pretty much everything else is noise at the margins. The decisive question is how these two curves, he calls them the S curve, of destruction and construction will cross. And the relevant time frame is the next half decade, the last 5 or 6 crucial years. So that's the context for me thinking I wanted to do something that would directly get new renewable energy built now, fast. And so could we go to the next slide? So the actual plan for what we're hoping to do in our house is only use clean electricity, and we've done all sorts of things which I talk about on the Green Open Homes tours, but some of them are double glazing and insulation. We've got a solar thermal system which heats some of our water from the sun. We've now got a solar PV system which generates electricity and a battery system, which means that we can use more of that, although we're also being paid for exporting electricity to the grid. Ripple Energy is quite an important part of this because every month we're getting credits on our bill from our share of the Ripple Energy wind farm. So what we've achieved now is that through Ripple, the solar PV panels, another form of investment called Sun Exchange, which is in South Africa, but I won't talk about that. We're now generating more clean electricity than we use by quite a wide margin. And that's so the combination of what we're generating in our own house, what our shares in Ripple, what the shares in Sun Exchange. And our aim, which is more difficult to achieve, but I think we're on track to achieve it, is to generate more clean electricity than we use, even when we get rid of gas. So if we could go to the next slide.
Can I just ask you,
Yeah.
who doesn't know, what do you mean by clean energy?
I mean generated from the sun and the wind. Yeah, so not burning oil, not burning coal, and not burning gas. I'm kind of leaving nuclear a bit to one side, but I was saying I'm leaving nuclear a bit to one side, but I'm like, basically, Ripple has absolutely nothing to do with nuclear anyway, but that's another whole subject. Okay, so this actually comes from Ripple Energy's website. It's their description of what Ripple Energy is, and they're saying you can buy part of a renewable energy project via a Ripple managed cooperative. You can pay a one-off cost for your share of the construction. So it's a bit like crowdfunding in the sense that thousands of people put in money. That money is used to build a wind farm or a solar park. Your energy supplier buys your electricity and supplies it to your home via the grid. I think that's slightly misleading. What it really means is that you have your energy provider providing you with electricity. You pay that provider, but then your shares and the income from them appears as a credit on your bill. There isn't really a direct connection. It's just the wind farm sells to the grid, you get your share of the money that it gets for selling the electricity. So, yeah, green electricity, and you stabilize your bills. And I think the projects are either 25 or 30 years. Could we go to the next slide? So this is the detail of what we have actually invested and what it represents. So the first project that Ripple ever did was a single wind turbine in South Wales, which is called Craig Fatha. That was the one that we invested in and invested to cover 100% of our annual electricity use. And then the second project called Kirk Hill, which was, I think it's either 7 or 8 wind turbines, so a lot bigger, in Scotland, has just been built just now and has just started generating this month. So the expected annual generation, Craig Fatha, the one in Wales, 7,000 kilowatt hours, that was at the time that I made this investment, that was our annual electricity use. We've since brought it down significantly, but that's what it was at that time. Kirk Hill will produce 1,400 kilowatt hours. The cost of it was £4,500 for the Craig Fatha investment and £800 for the Kirk Hill investment. So total investment was £5,356. And they have a limit, Ripple. They say that you can invest up to 120% of your annual electricity use. You can't invest more than that. And so we've hit that limit. And actually, because we've brought our electricity use down, we're probably at more than that. But then as soon as we get the heat pump, our electricity use is going to go up. So could we have the next slide? So these are the savings that we've had so far. So the savings started when the Craig Fatha wind turbine came online in March 2022. And since then, we have had savings that have appeared on our bill of £2,719, and we've generated 15,000 kilowatt hours, or our share of the turbine has generated that amount. Carbon savings, work equivalent, you can see. If we go to the next slide. Now, an important thing to understand is that you pay your money as your contribution to getting the thing built, and building these things is extremely expensive. A wind farm, the cost of building it is huge. The cost of running it is tiny. So this for Ripple is a way of gathering that capital to get it built. But the the problem is you're having to put your money in, they build it, and then you get your savings. So there's a gap, there's a waiting period. With Craig Father, we paid that £4,500 in June 2021. We got the first savings on our bill in March 2022. So it was 9 months. I think it was quite quick because it was one wind turbine and it was going on a ridge where there were already other wind turbines. Kirk Hill, which was 7 or 8 wind turbines, much bigger project, it's about a 2-year, 4-month wait. So we paid in 2022 and it's just started, the savings have just started. The project that is open for shares at the moment, which is another scale of increase, I think this one is about 14 or 15, 14 maybe big wind turbines. I think it would probably be a similar thing. If you invested in it now, you wouldn't start getting your savings until 2.5 years' time, probably. So if we could go to the next. So this is it, the current, this is from their website about their current project. And it's big. It's going to be enough to power around 54,000 homes. The second bullet point there, you don't need to own your home for Ripple, and that's quite a significant thing. That in Green Open Homes, we talk a lot to people who are lucky enough to own their own houses, and they're also lucky enough to have the resources to pay for things like solar panels and various other things. Here is something that can be used by somebody who's renting. It doesn't matter that you don't own the property, so the availability is wider, and you don't have to invest to cover 100% of your electricity use. You could start with 20% and work your way up as you can afford. Can we go to the next? Now this I need to mention, I didn't really understand this at the beginning. I now understand it, which is that the money that I receive from Ripple is treated partly as repayment of capital and partly as interest. And so if you were interested in doing this, you'd need to think about the possible tax implications. That depends on your tax rates. And so if you're a basic rate taxpayer, you have an allowance of £1,000 worth of interest every year before there's any tax. But if you're a higher rate taxpayer, that allowance is £500. So here, because of my circumstances and I'm a higher rate taxpayer, I'm going to be paying income tax on, see those figures down the bottom, it says £216 of the annual savings is counted as capital withdrawn, but that figure 1786, that will be going on my tax return and will be taxable. So we could come to the next slide. So this is the reason for Ripple's People Power Manifesto, which MHSG has supported and which has been sent to all candidates, and they have 4 requests which, with a new government, which is what everybody is expecting, I think there is a good chance that this could change in a positive way. The first thing they're asking for is that any new big project ought to have 20% shares offered to people in this way. So instead of being 100% owned by a big company, The other thing they're asking for is that owners of something like Ripple shouldn't have to pay the green subsidies on their electricity bills because they're basically already putting their money directly into green energy. No tax on bill savings, that's the thing that I've just mentioned, because there's an anomaly that if you put solar panels on your roof and you get electricity and you use it or you sell it to the grid, it's not treated as interest. It's not taxable, so it should be the same. The other thing is, this is something that I very strongly support, is the suggestion that there should be interest-free loans so that people who can't afford an upfront investment like this should be offered the opportunity to have an interest-free loan which covers the period until their investment has been paid back. And just on that subject, because of the increase in electricity prices, it looks like our investment is probably going to be paid back in around 4 years, probably, which is a lot less than was originally planned. So what it really means is after that, it's 20 years of savings on electricity bills. The other just two little things to mention. If you move house, it moves with you. And the other thing is that if you want to, you can leave these shares in your will, or you can put a beneficiary declaration. So they have to be owned by an individual. They can't be jointly owned. So in one household, one person has to own them, but can then leave them to one or more family members. So that's it. Have I gone way over time? Not too bad. Okay, I think the next slide, just says questions. So, yeah, thank you very much.
You want to take a seat and then we'll
Okay. The other thing I was going to say is that I'm going to hang around, so I'm happy to take questions over a cup of tea. So it might be good to direct questions to Rob while he's here online.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. I'm going to kick off the questions, if I may, given that I've got the microphone. Rob, I was wondering if you are noticing that...
Sorry, can I encourage you to come over to this back chair?
Oh. Oh, can you not see me? That could be a blessing, but anyway. Hello, Rob. I was wondering if you had noticed there being any impact as a result of people power from the banks and investment funds. Are they changing their habits? Are they noticing people turning away from them? Is the swell big enough for there to be any movement, is my question. Oh, we're not here. We can't hear you. Sorry, Rob. We've got no...
It's okay.
There we go.
Muted so that
Right, you're back.
And that kind of thing. I guess when ethical consumers started 30 years ago, it was almost, there was no one really talked about ethical banking or ethical investment. It wasn't an idea at that point. And nowadays, pretty much the regulators are becoming involved, and they're requiring banks and building societies to make statements around social and environmental issues. So we've gone from where no one was talking about finance or ethical banking 30 years ago to where pretty much everyone is, and that went through a stage where there were pioneer providers like Co-op Bank and Triodos moving in and becoming the first people to articulate the language in this space. But now pretty much everyone is doing it. I think we read Santander's social environmental report, which was 600 pages long, this year and the detail that it goes into about its investment. So everyone is talking about it, but you know, is it having impact? And I guess it is having some impact because we are beginning to globally, because we've begun. Often, an ethical consumer, when we ask ourselves, "Are we really having impact?" We're just talking about all this stuff. We take if you like, when people try and sue us, or people try and stop what we're trying to say, or people try to fight back, or to call us out, or that we can tell that perhaps then or challenge us on the quality of what we're saying. That's when we know that people are feeling pressure in order to do that. Otherwise, they could just ignore us, if you see what I mean. So that we know that, and in the States, very particularly, we've noticed that what we've got, there's an ESG backlash, if you see what I mean. I don't know if you've heard about it, and it's particularly in the deep South, southern conservative states. They're trying to ban some investment funds from having, you know, activity with their public sector and all this kind of stuff. So I think I think this is because they've found it difficult to raise money for dodgy projects in deep South state, you know, very conservative states in the US. And this is, if you like, and the backlash of social media, you know, effectively lies about what ESG is and how it's going to, you know, green, climate change is going to bring down society as we know it. That's probably quite a good example of how it's working. I'd say another example is that we're beginning to see the regulator move into this space, and particularly in Europe and now in the UK, we're looking at what because pretty much all companies are now making green claims. All the finance companies are making green claims, and as we said in our own research, we found 23% of them to be effectively quite poor, and so the regulator around green claims, particularly in finance sector companies, is beginning to be regulated quite hard across Europe and in the UK. And this is because the regulator itself has identified what I mentioned at the beginning, that actually if you make the finance companies stop doing really stupid things, then we've got a fighting chance of fixing the problems that are around us, if you see what I mean. So those are just two examples of impacts. I mean, there are obviously lots that you can see, and we measure we measure the ethical market every year in the UK, and we find, every year there's growth of what we call ethically screened funds somehow, up to as much as 60% of all funds now have some kind of ethical criteria around them. And it's not enough, and it's not fast enough, but this is big cultural change. And, if the trajectory maintains, there's reasons for optimism, I guess, as an answer.
Thank you. It's also a question for Rob. I can accept that a sort of ethical savings might not have the same returns as less ethical ones. But are ethical investments riskier then? You mentioned something about how one is advised not to invest more than 10%. I think you said because of risk.
So that was... this is as an individual directly investing or holding shares in a company. And I think that would be the same advice if it was not ethical and it was not into just one company, if you see what I mean. Because normally individual investors pool their risk across a load of sectors and a load of different companies. So I wouldn't say that ethical investments are more risky. And, certainly... up until the last couple of years, they've also looked very sound in terms of financial decisions. So no, there's not more risk, but yes, it's risky to put all your money in direct investments in small companies that are trying to do innovative things, if you see what I mean. And this is why the advice is normally to keep it to a small part of your total savings or investment, if you see what I mean. I don't know if that's an answer, but
Hi, thank you. I have actually 3 questions, but they are, I think, directly linked to each other. The first one is, I don't know much about the ethical consumer, but how are you funded? So in respect of, do you have any, apart from consumers, do you get any finance from products that you put on the website itself? And then I've seen from what you've shown that some of the lists are actually, more than a year old. Some of them were still 23 or 22. And how do I do the research to know what is the current one that is, or the correct ethical standing on it? And the last one is actually whether it's a question that I've been asked to ask by my wife, who can't be here, which is, can there be an ethical or sustainable investment that is coming from a bank or a fund which is not ethical?
I'm just writing those down so I don't have to ask you again when I get to the third one. That is not ethical. Okay. So the first question about how ethical consumer is funded is that we have 20 staff, and we are funded, half our income is through readers' subscriptions, so or just individuals subscribing to the magazine and the website. The other half of the money is through commercial research that we carry out for organisations like Amnesty and Oxfam, but also for organisations like Lush and the Cooperative Group. So we do have commercial operations. We also get about 5% of our income from advertising on the website. There is a conflict there, and in an ideal world we wouldn't be taking this money, but it's hard to make it stack up, if you see what I mean. And so how we justify it, if you like, to ourselves, is that we publish the reasoning behind every detail of our ranking in mind-boggling detail on the website. So if we were like cheating and giving decent marks to people who'd given us money, it would be obvious to anyone who took the care to actually look at the systems and the standards that we were applying, to make sure that we were applying them consistently across sectors. So we justify that through transparency, if you see what I mean, by going, we're fully transparent and the reasoning behind the decisions that we make. So that's the answer to the first question. Some of the research is more than 1 year old, and indeed that's true. And I wish that wasn't the case, and I wish we had a team of 200 and not 15 researchers or whatever it is that we have. But I guess so. If really obvious things happen in a sector, we can make the changes live. So we do. So some of the guides we do change live. They're electronic. And so if a large company buys another one, or someone goes out of business and ceases trading, so we do alter them if something really obvious happens, but we don't systematically review every sector more than every couple of years, simply because we don't have the resources to do it. And I guess that's the same with which magazine, and whether the products are working. If you see what I mean, you can't run a research program across lots of sectors. simultaneously. So that's the answer to that question. That is just a practical necessity. And the third one is, can there be a sustainable product that is from a bank that isn't sustainable, if you see what I mean? And in a sense, that's a $6 million question, and that people debate that round and round forever, and there isn't necessarily a fixed answer. At Ethical Consumer, we rate down, if you like, sustainable products that are owned by unsustainable companies, if you see what I mean. So they will get a lower score. There are other people that don't do it that way. And, you know, it's how you effect change in the business sector is an endless debate. But we've taken the view that when we look at companies, we give extra marks to those where all their products are sustainable. Indeed, we think it's a mark of greenwashing if you have a load of unsustainable products and then one sustainable one that you bang on about a lot in the press, if you see what I mean. So it's a key indicator that we use in the rankings that we construct.
Thank you very much. It's slightly off the sustainability topic, but I was interested in what your opinion of credit unions were as banks. I've got a small amount of money in our local one.
I mean, we really like credit unions. They are, you know, if you like, they're an attempt to fix, you know, financial flexibility for poor households, if you see what I mean. And so, you know, and credit unions really like it if they've got some middle class members who are saving in them, because it allows them to loan out money to people who don't. And in a sense, we think probably, you know, we have debates here with the credit union organisations that are based in Manchester historically, and we think that they could probably push their ethical credentials harder, if you see what I mean. They're from an older culture, if you see what I mean, that doesn't really have this, you know, ESG language as part of their makeup. But we really like credit unions and think that what they do is great. And if you've got money in it, you know, full marks, because they're great organisations.
Thank you. Anybody else? I'd like to ask Jeremy a quick question, actually, about Ripple. Who owns the land that they build their farms on? And also, is it just wind, or do they put up solar panels as well? Do they have solar farms?
They've got one solar farm which is about to start construction, I think. So the first project was the single turbine in South Wales. The second project was the seven, I think, turbines in Scotland. The third project was the solar park in Devon, which is being built on land that used to be a sewage treatment plant, I think. And I don't really know about who they buy the land from. I mean, I'm guessing they buy the land rather than lease the land, but I actually don't know. I don't know.
Mine's addressed it around the Ripple thing, a couple of them. I'm not sure I got what the deal is. Are you effectively committing to take your electricity from Ripple for the next 30 years? Is that essentially what you're doing? Sorry, and then the second question was, did you look at Abundance, which is also doing projects in this sort of zone?
No, I haven't heard of Abundance. I'd be interested to hear whether it's you know, a similar model. So I'd be interested to hear about that. I think the deal is that you buy your share of the project up front. Your share of the project will then provide you with savings on your electricity bill over a 25-year or possibly 30-year period, your provider, your electricity provider, has to be signed up with Ripple. When I started, it was only one choice. It had to be Co-op Energy, and Co-op Energy had a deal with Octopus. So essentially I was an Octopus customer, and I'm still an Octopus customer. For the latest one, they say you can either be like that with Co-op, or they've now done deals with 3 other providers. And I read something saying that the deals that they've got lined up for the current project will cover 70% of UK households without them having to change their energy provider. But what I did when I made the investment was we switched our provider to Co-op Energy and Octopus, and we're now with Octopus. So it doesn't tie you, it doesn't tie you, but it does limit your, if you're in the habit of changing energy providers every year, say, then it would limit your choices, but it doesn't tie you to an energy provider.
Okay, any last questions?
In regards to I see. Okay, my question about the, I mean, after I've seen your presentation, actually, I think I don't need to ask, because you already have production of PV and hot water, and you have a battery, and all this would, in my mind, will take you a very long time to get your return on investment, although from what we've seen, this is a phenomenal return. But I do think that there was, you know, a peak in terms of the cost of electricity. When I saw the presentation of Ripple by, I think, the one who chairs it, I think she's a lady, right?
Sarah Merrick.
Yes. Yeah. I thought that it wasn't, I wasn't really sure about whether it's an investment that I can then sell on, maybe, okay? Or if it's my share and I've put money in it, can I...
No, I think you have to regard it as something different to an investment. It's nothing like buying some shares in an investment fund that you're going to be able to sell easily. It's not tradable. It's not transferable. It's you have to see it. The way I see it, I don't really see it as an investment. I see it as a utility provider. It's basically a way of paying some of your electricity bills up front. That's what it's like, I think.
And if you'll be lucky enough to have PVs that will give you 100% of your electricity, how would this work? I mean, you would not consume energy, so
yeah, I mean, as I said, my goal, which we've already achieved, but we've still got a gas boiler. My goal is to be part of the solution and no longer be part of the problem. That's my motivation. So my motivation is to provide a model, which I hope other people will follow, of a household where we're generating more electricity than we're using, and we're not using any fossil fuels. That's the aim. And my focus here is very strongly to do with climate and nature. I'm not perceiving this as solely in terms of financial return. I'm willing to do things, and I am doing things that, because I'm lucky enough to be able to afford to do it, I'm willing to do things that are not going to give me a financial return. So, but then, I mean, if your perspective is financial return only, and you are not concerned about climate and nature, then Ripple is massively quicker at paying back than putting solar panels on your own roof. Because putting a solar panel system on your roof and having batteries, which is really expensive, is going to pay back, the payback time is going to be around 14 years. For a Ripple investment, producing 4 times as much electricity for a third of the cost or less, the payback time is going to be around 5 years, 4 or 5 years. So if you're perceiving it through that lens, but as I say, that's not really the lens that I'm looking through. I'm looking through the lens that Bill McKibben was talking about, which is we're on course for a lot of death and a lot of suffering, and I want to be part of trying to ameliorate that as much as possible. That's my motivation.
Last 2 questions.
Quick question on a completely different thing. We've been fortunate enough to buy land for rewilding, and we've also been fortunate enough to understand that going forward there is an opportunity to achieve what they call natural capital valuations by achieving things like biodiversity net gain on your land. And the law in this country is now all infrastructure developments have to deliver plus 10% BNG for their project, and if they can't achieve that on site, they have to buy credits. So if you have a project with land where you achieve good stuff for nature, you can get something called natural capital valuations, and these will be tradable. And this provides a return on, you could call, an investment in land. It's just a question for Rob. Is this a thing that you're aware of or you'll be looking at? And as an investment, land is also free of inheritance tax, which is an added benefit as well.
Yeah, super interesting question. I've not heard of that, actually. I mean, we look at carbon credits a lot and the trading of that, and people, it's been possible to plant trees on your land to get, if you like, offsetting payments from companies who are looking to offset their stuff. And I have to say we've taken a bit of a dim view of those, because certainly the credits that are given if you don't do it, it's a bit like we compare it to I forget what the Catholic Church used to have in the Middle Ages. You would pay money for if you'd sinned particularly, you would pay money. I forget the name for it, but and then you trade these, and in fact people, the carbon markets that have grown up around this kind of offsetting discourse are under a lot of pressure, particularly this year now, as the value of some of those has been held up to proper scrutiny. Rewilding is great, but tradable credits around it just kind of smell like carbon credits to me. But I don't know enough about them otherwise. But it was something we could look at. Who knows? Yeah, if it's coming, we heard it here first.
Just a very quick follow-up question to Jeremy, following up on the previous question. You said that you can't trade or transfer your shares. am I right that you can trade them back into Ripple?
I haven't looked into this, but I think possibly in very limited circumstances. But I think there are restrictions on transfer. Yeah, I'm not sure, but I think you have to, if you're going to do it, you've got to perceive it as a long-term commitment.
Can we squeeze one last one in?
To Jeremy, I'm still trying to get my head around the Ripple thing and your objective of being part of the solution. I mean, I thought that for example, I've just fairly recently switched to ecotricity. So I thought that would be being part of the solution. Can you, in a nutshell, explain why Ripple is more so?
I think the key issue is that you're getting something new built fast. That's the key issue. So ecotricity, which by the way is on the list of the ones that are signing up for Ripple, ecotricity is great, and you choose a good electricity provider like ecotricity, that's great, because they're doing lots of good things. And ecotricity is an example of a company that is putting money into building new wind turbines. What it doesn't give you is the kind of direct personal connection. And you're actually directly putting money into getting something new built quickly. But it's not that far away from being with a provider like ecotricity, so long as you trust that they're going to use some of your money. They're not going to use your money directly, but they're going to be involved in building new renewables, so it's not that different.
Thank you very much, both of you. That was really interesting, incredibly insightful. Thank you for your time, both of you. Rob, thank you for coming all the way from Manchester.
Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, cheers everyone. Good to see you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye now.
There's tea and biscuits outside. There's Jeremy available to answer any more questions. A couple of reminders. There is a plant and flower show here at the weekend on Saturday, which is, Brian, when is this? 3 o'clock? 3 o'clock here, the Muswell Hill and District Horticultural Society. So come along and buy your plants and, tea and cakes again. Brilliant. Thank you all for coming. Let's refresh.